we're going to talk a little bit about one of the typical use cases for LCD digital signage, and that's a 2x1. So side-by-side or stacked LCD screens. They can be in landscape or portrait. Content can span across, or they could be addressed individually, and we'll cover a little bit about that. So let's get started. First of all, we employ the DMP8122. This is our dual output media player, capable of producing two screens of 1080p or a single 4K output. And again, these players ship pre-configured, cables included, along with everything that's necessary to install and deploy to site and become operational. So we package everything together in packets that are suitable for each application, and those go to site ready to install, turn on, and schedule content from Venus Control Suite. So included with those configurable packets are the 2x1 LCDs, the mounts, the player, and here we're looking at the mount, an example of one of the mounts. So this is a 2x1 mount. Note the 4 brackets that connect to 2 side-by-side LCD screens on a single rail system. That makes sure that the LCDs are aligned with each other and makes alignment and kind of little tiny tweaks that are necessary to get the screens perfectly flush and aligned with each other. Makes that very simple. We use mounts from Chief or Peerless AV, and again, those are matched to the solution during the quoting process. So I mentioned side-by-side LCDs. This is an example of that. So this is 2 side-by-side commercial-grade LCDs. We have these available in standard or narrow bezel, and some of the narrow bezel LCDs these days, the bezel is barely visible. And so for those installs where aesthetics are really important and the customer really wants to make a quality impact with very little outside bordering and very little bezel between the screens that might be side by side or even in a video wall, we have those available as well, and these are all available from LG. That's our preferred LCD provider. So a little bit about the solution. The media players come in the kit, and obviously you need to supply power and a network jack at each media player location. For multi-screen installs or 2x1s and single screens, that can be a single power and network drop. For 4x1s and even some 3x1s, it might be preferable to have 2 power drops and 2 network jacks available, and that's shown in the riser diagrams that we'll look at in a little bit. 2 LCD screens are provided in the 2x1 configuration along with the appropriate mount. And we run HDMI to the first screen, HDMI to the second screen, and then for screen control, where we want to be able to turn those screens on and off, adjust the volume, adjust the brightness, etc., we run a DB9 serial connector, serial cable out to the first display, and then we daisy chain using a 3.5 millimeter patch cable, a little cable that goes between the 2 displays and passes on that screen control commands, and that's how LG systems are configured. Some things to know, obviously, as we mentioned, the components are matched in configure 1. They ship pre-configured, pre-associated, labeled, and ready to go for external players. The multi-screen applications, like I said, use the DMP8122, landscape or portrait, and they can even be ceiling mounted. We have ceiling mounted options as well, so the screens can hang from the ceiling if desired. LG displays are available with high brightness, standard brightness, narrow, and standard bezels as well. And content can span across the displays or be individually addressed to each display. We divvy up the content across the screens using the VCS layout editor, and for more tips and tricks and training on that, see the Venus Control Suite training program. Look for the layout editor content, and we have training and examples and guides available for using the layout editor to divide up the canvas that's presented by the media player to the physical displays that are on the wall. Again, the serial port on the DMP connects display control to display number 1, and then we run from display number 1 to display number 2 using that 3.5 millimeter stereo cable. Looks like a headphone cable that goes from screen to screen. A little bit about the overall solution. I know folks have questions about how this all works. Venus Control Suite, the media player, the physical displays on the wall. So if we start with Venus, and we know that we have virtual displays inside Venus, we call them, Venus Control Suite displays. Those are, in fact, a setup of a media player for digital signage purposes. What we have is a media player. That's a physical piece of hardware. In the case of the DWP, that's a software installed on a physical display. So we're going to use the hardware-based DMP, the 8121 or the 8122 in this example. And you have that hardware that contains some settings, right? So the player is set up a certain way. It has a sign, which is the resolution and the output configuration for that media player. And that sign carries the overall canvas size, and that canvas size will match the virtual display size that is configured in Venus Control Suite. This is, it's necessary for those two to match, and that becomes part of what we call associated. So this media player with its settings and its sign are stored as a profile, and that profile is how we easily configure the media players. That profile is stored on the media player itself, and then we associate that media player to the VCS display, that virtual display that lives inside of Venus Control Suite software. As far as content goes, the content understands that you're building for a particular display. I need a certain layout or a certain set of zones and looks that create the content the way that I want to present it. So think of this as the presentation. This is done in Web Editor in Venus Control Suite, and allows you to create a look for your presentation, a number of zones that may or may not span across displays. Maybe you want to address displays individually, and you create those presentations and store them for the different kinds of graphical visualization or presentation that you want to schedule. So you go ahead and schedule those pieces of content out to the physical displays. The media player connects those physical displays, uses the layout and looks that were created in Web Editor and Layout Editor to, again, divide up how the content is displayed across those physical displays. So these concepts are important to understand. Look to VCS training for more about virtual displays and configuring displays in Venus, how content is created, the media player, quick start guide and other resources gives you more information about how the DMPs work. But overall, the system is kind of a combination of Venus Control Suite and its display setup, a media player and its settings and canvas size, and then a content creation system called Web Editor that takes advantage of that display, carves it up however you would like for your particular type of presentation, and then physically outputs that display or that content to the physical displays hanging on the wall or the ceiling or whatever the case might be. So if you look at the riser diagram for a 2x1, you can see on the left we have the media player at the top. You can see the HDMI A goes out to the first screen ID 1 in the middle. HDMI B goes out to the second display on the HDMI N, obviously. And then you have this RS-232 patch cable labeled D that goes between the two displays and originates at COM1 out of the media player, and that COM1 you can see maps to RS-232 input on the first display. The riser diagram gives you a little bit of tips about the power and the cables and things to look out for as far as installation goes, and these are handy reference that are available in the product reference pages. So an example, this is a 3x1. I didn't have a handy 2x1 to make a video of, but in this case, you can see this 3x1. Just imagine it's only 2 screens wide. You can see that content can be set up to span across the displays in the case of that transition that wiped across the 2 right-hand displays. Or we can address the screens individually with separate pieces of content or pieces of content that appear to be independent of each other. So that's kind of a quick overview of a 2x1. I hope this is helpful, and stay tuned for the next module.